Hi, Ken 1171 here, and in this video, I want to show you a new script I have created to help managing morphs on a figure, morph dials to be more precise. And here I have two figures with morphs and clothing applied. And I first want to show you the problems that the tool fixes and then how to fix it. So first of all, let's see here on the left, I have this figure. If I open the dial master and check for the iClose morph. By the way, I'm going to use the dial master just to save time having to search for these dials through a list of 600 that Dawn has. So it's much faster to just type the name here and I have instant access to the morph. All right, so I want to close her eyes, and if I set the dial to 1 with this morph character applied, you'll notice that the eyes don't close completely. That is rather common when working with figure morphs when the content creator didn't create the morph adjustments for this specific shape. So as you can see, the dial has a limit, so I cannot go beyond 1 on this dial and the eyes don't close. If I disable limits and keep dialing, you'll notice that even though the value keeps going up, the morph doesn't change. That's because the dial was set with limits internally. On the specific dial, they set limits to it. So even if I disable and keep dialing up, it's not going to help. So that's one of the things the Morph Manager does. Let me show you. Here it is, the Morph Manager. And on the top, I have the figure, the item I'm working on, which is I call the target. And then the second part is what dials do I want to affect? By default is all of them. And then the operation I want to perform. The first one is limits, which is the one I was talking about here. So I don't want to affect all morphs. I only want to affect this one. So I'm going to select the dial by specific name, which is iClose. And then on the limits tab, the default is set to 1. I'm going to set this to 1.3. That should be enough to close the eyes. And when I click apply, it has found 3 dials with that name and set the maximum value for the dial to 1.3. You will notice here we have checkboxes to enable, disable, setting the minimum or maximum values. Only the ones that are enabled are changed. So minimum value here is disabled, so it's not going to be affected. This helps you be more precise on which value you want to change on the dial. Okay, so I have set all dials with this name, the maximum dial value to 1.3. So if I refresh the morph dial here on dial master, if I now dial it up to max value, you'll see the eyes close. So now I can close the eyes without having to go hunting for the dial limits and change them one by one. It does it automatically throughout the figure. So that's the first one, the limits. Next thing we can edit with the Morph Manager is the dial sensibility. That is, for example, let's go here to this dial. The dial sensibility is how fast the change applies to the morph when I dial the morph. The bigger the value, the faster the change. So this is usually hard-coded dial by dial right here on this value. So let's say when I'm dialing this I close, you'll notice here that it changes very slowly. So it's hard to make bigger changes because of the sensibility is too low. What if I want to set it to, for example, 0.1? I still have the same figure and dial selected, so the changes are going to be applied only to those. And I'm going to apply this change. And again, apply to only 3 dials. That fits this criteria. And if I refresh the dial master, now if I dial, it goes much faster, as you can see here, which is maybe what you want. if you need to the dial to be more precise or to change faster, this is how you do it. You change the dial sensibility. All right. So next operation is delete. There are cases where, for example, you have body morphs that affect the clothing and you don't want it to. Let me give you an example. I have, for example, abdomen that is applied to the figure. For example, abs conturn 2. So pay attention here to this part of the shirt. When I zero this morph, you'll see that it's deforming the shirt, and I don't want it to, because usually shirts don't follow specific shapes of the figure. They just drape down. So for as long as the morph exists on the shirt, it's gonna follow whenever I dial it. And if I don't want that to happen, what I can do is I check here on the shirt, and yeah, here is the morph on the shirt that I don't want to be affected. So if I copy this name and I come here to, it already has whatever I have selected on the figure selects here automatically, and I want to apply only to this exact morph on delete. So only this dial will be affected. Pay attention, it's selected here. If I click apply, the morph is removed. And if you notice, the shirt is not being affected anymore by that morph. You'll notice I have an option here that is disabled by default, which is to delete only morphs that have no geometry. Meaning that, for example, if I look at the body parts of the shirt, it has, for example, head. The head part of the shirt has no geometry, but there are cases where morphs are copied to parts of the shirt that have no geometry, which just uses more memory, has no practical use. So you can do a general cleanup. For example, if I select all dials on the shirt and I want to delete only the morphs that have only the dial morphs that affect parts of the shirt that have no geometry, when I apply it, you'll see here that it didn't find any. Actually, I created this shirt, so I cleaned up so this doesn't happen. But there are cases where you will find clothing that has complete skeletons, like hands and fingers and eyes. And when you copy morphs to the clothing, it applies to those parts that have completely no effect at all because they have these parts of the clothing have no geometry. And you can clean it up if you enable this option here. Conversely, if this is not enabled, which is not by default, and you have all, and you click apply, it deletes all morph dials on the figure. You may want to use that when you want to have a clean slate for something you want to do in particular. And you can apply this to the figure as well. For example, I want to remove all morphs from the figure. This is how you do it. You select the figure, and then select all or just some dial in particular. Let me show you here how you make dial selections. By default, all dials are selected, which means I would whatever operation I'm going to do is going to apply to all dials. And then you can do it by specific name. By specific names mean the exact name. So if you type here a dial that, for example, apps can turn 24 and click apply, it's not going to find any dial with that name because it doesn't exist. But if you want to apply to specific dials that have this in the partial name, for example, only abs, for example, and I want to delete all the dials on the shirt, let me select the shirt. By the way, you can select on the scene or from the list here, whatever is easier for you. Okay, so by partial name, it means the operation will apply to all dials that have this as part of the name, anywhere in the name. So if I apply, yeah, it didn't find any, but you get the point. That's how you can make sub-selection of morphs that have a certain string as part of the name. So you can apply to all, to a specific one, or a set of morphs that have a certain part of the name that you can set here. Now, going to the next one is follow. Follow is not specific to dials. It has to do with conforming parameters on the clothing. I have here Victoria 4 on the right, and you will notice that the hair is conforming correctly, following the morphs, the shoes too, but the top and the skirt are not. And this is because, most likely, either the content creator didn't configure the conforming parameters correctly, or the clothing was created before autofollow was introduced into Poser. So if I select the hip here, you will see that, okay, let's see what morph is applied to the figure first. So let's clear this and see which morphs are not zero on the figure. And there it is. It's voluptuous. It's this dial here. So if I filter by voluptuous and select the clothing, of course, I have to remove the not zero. Okay, it has the morph, but it's not applying. So if it has the morph, it's not applying, it means the conforming parameters are not set correctly. And that's what this option is for. It fixes the conforming parameters on the clothing so that it auto follows the figure if they are not doing that already. So you have the option here to apply to everything that's conformed to the figure in one go, or if you disable this, it applies to only whatever conforming item is selected. For example, the skirt. If I disable this and click apply, you see, okay, now the clothing automatically follows the dial. Not just that dial in particular, but any dial. And if I enable this back and click apply again, even if the skirt is selected, what it's going to do when apply to all conformed is selected, it's going to say, okay, I have the skirt selected, but I want to apply to everything that's conformed. So it's going to check what figure this is conformed to and apply to everything. So when I click apply, it now fixes the conforming parameters on everything the figure is wearing, which is a quick way to do this. And this option is enabled by default. So that's what this option is for, is to fix autofollow conforming on the figure. And now if you look here, if I dial this morph, it auto follows it. Not just this one, but any morphs, assuming that the clothing has the morph. Autofollow will not create the morph on the clothing for you. That's for another tool. All right, so let's set this dial back. And the last option here is hidden. This is useful when you have, for example, on clothing, let's select the top here, and you'll notice here that it has all dials visible. And I have chest selected, and all these dials are showing. And this is not exactly useful because these dials are slave dials. They are controlled by the body. So showing them here is not useful because you're not supposed to dial them. They will follow whatever dials the body of the base figure is set to. So if you want to clean this up, that's what this option is for. By default, it applies to all dials, but you can select specific ones if you want. But let's see how I can hide everything, all the slave dials that are showing here. Okay, let's look at the option. By default, the option is to hide them. You have the option to apply this to body as well. That's the body group on the clothing. By default, it doesn't do it. So let's see what happens if I apply as it is. You'll see that it hides all the dials that are slaves, means that the dials that are controlled by the body. And if I go to body, you'll see that the dials are still there, meaning that if I don't enable the option to hide them on body as well, they're going to keep showing. If I enable this on body and click apply, you'll see that it hides everything. But when I say everything, I mean it does not affect transforms. If you look here, the transforms are the translation, rotation, and scale. You have an option separate here to enable affecting these dials for all these operations. By default is disabled because, as you can see here on the title, this is for managing morphs, not transforms. But you can affect transforms if you enable this option. And you'll notice here that when you enable this option on the hidden tab, it also enables the transforms option. Now, if I disable, it's not available. So with that enabled, if I have transforms enabled and I click apply, you see that it hides also the transforms. In most cases, you don't want to do that. But, well, very rarely you're going to be using transforms on the clothing. That's usually something you want to do on the base figure, not the clothing. But you can always unhide them by unchecking this option. You bring them back. So let's disable this back, and that covers about all the options you can do with this tool. You will notice that some options are disabled. For example, this one is not enabled on delete tab because it doesn't apply. And on the follow, you can only select all dials because this does not apply to dials, it applies to the conforming parameters. And if you select another tab, it's back. So some options are enabled, disabled, depending on what tab you are because they're context sensitive. Last thing I want to show you here is that there is a description on the status box that whenever you select the tab, it tells you what this operation does here, which is useful for you to know what this is doing in particular. And as usual with my scripts, you have the question mark here, which is the help button, which if you click, it opens the PDF manual where you can get more detailed information about the script. And that's what I wanted to show you. Thanks for watching.